The night of the reunion, I was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. I had a corner office, a six-figure salary, and a husband who told me every morning that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined standing in that hotel ballroom with a glass of champagne in my hand, was that the woman who had made my teenage years a living nightmare had spent the last 6 months working with my mother-in-law to systematically drain my professional bank account, forge my signature on a business loan, and redirect $40,000 of my income into a shell company neither of them expected me to find. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same aggressive floral scent she'd worn at 17, loud and territorial, and whispered it right into my ear. Still the same poor little nobody. And she smiled the smile of someone who believed it. She had no idea that the folder sitting in my car in a manila envelope on the passenger seat contained enough evidence to end her. Both of them. I need to take you back to where this really started, because none of it makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning, for me, was a Tuesday morning in early October, 6 months before the reunion, when the world still felt like mine. I remember that morning with unusual clarity, the kind of clarity you only get in retrospect, when you understand that it was the last truly peaceful morning of a long chapter of your life. I woke up before my alarm, which I almost never did. The bedroom was still dark, that particular shade of gray-blue that October mornings have in our city, and the air through the cracked window smelled like wet leaves and distant coffee from the bakery 2 blocks down. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even, one arm thrown over his eyes the way he always slept when he didn't have an early meeting. I lay there for a few minutes, just listening to the quiet, watching the pale light gather on the ceiling, feeling the specific satisfaction of a life that had been difficult to build and was now undeniably solid. We had bought the house 3 years prior, after my promotion to Director of Operations at Harlow & Crane Consulting. It was a brownstone in a neighborhood I had dreamed about as a child when I grew up 20 minutes away in a part of the city where the sidewalks were cracked and the bodega on the corner had bars on its windows. My mother had worked 2 jobs to keep us fed, and there had been years, stretches of years, when I wore the same 3 outfits to school on rotation and hoped no one would notice. They always noticed. Kids like Melissa Vance always noticed, and they always made sure you knew they had. But that Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen in bare feet on the warm tile floor, grinding coffee beans that I had ordered from a small farm in Colombia, watching the sun come through the kitchen window and fall in long gold bars across the counter, I was not that girl anymore. I had worked for 12 years to not be that girl anymore. I had a salary that made me feel, physically, like I could breathe deeply for the first time in my adult life. I had a husband who loved me, a house I was proud of, and a career that I had built entirely on my own terms. I had earned all of it. Every single piece of it. What I did not have, and what I would spend the next 6 months desperately wishing I had paid closer attention to, was a clear understanding of how much my mother-in-law resented every single one of those facts. Patricia Harmon, Daniel's mother, my mother-in-law of 4 years, was a woman who operated in a register I had never quite learned to read. She was unfailingly polite. She brought hostess gifts, remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you notes on cream-colored stationery. She called me sweetheart in a tone that felt warm the first 100 times and began to feel, after a while, like something else, like something placed very carefully between genuine affection and its precise opposite. She was the kind of woman who could say, "What a creative choice," while looking at something you had worked very hard on, and leave you genuinely uncertain for the next hour whether you had been praised or quietly eviscerated. Daniel had always insisted I was imagining it. "She loves you," he said, every time I raised a concern. "She's just a little old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it." He said this with the particular ease of a man who has never had to decode the language of women who mean a great deal by the things they appear not to mean. I loved him for many things, but his blindness to his mother was not one of them. I had decided years ago to manage it, to be patient, to not become the daughter-in-law who caused problems. That decision, I would later understand, was the thing she had been counting on. The first strange thing happened 3 weeks after that October morning, at a Sunday dinner that Patricia had organized at her house with what she described as the whole family, which meant Daniel, me, his cousin Roger, and Roger's wife Diane, who I had always liked because she had a loud laugh and never seemed to be performing anything. The dinner itself was unremarkable. Patricia had made her pot roast, which was genuinely excellent, and there was wine, and the conversation moved through the usual channels: work, the neighborhood, an upcoming trip Roger and Diane were planning to Portugal. It was after dessert, when Roger and Daniel had drifted into the living room and Diane had excused herself, that Patricia sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded around her wine glass and said in a very measured, very casual voice, "Daniel mentioned you've been doing really well at work." "A raise this quarter," he said. I told her yes, that it had been a good year. I felt a small, familiar flicker of something. Not alarm, not quite, but I smiled and kept my voice easy. Patricia nodded slowly, the way she did when she was processing something. And then she said, "You know, I've always thought it was so important for couples to have shared finances, full transparency. It builds trust." She paused, and the pause had a shape to it, something deliberate. "Daniel is so generous, you know. He's always been that way. He'd give you anything. I just hope that generosity is always—" Another pause, lighter this time, almost apologetic. "Appreciated." I held my wine glass very steadily and said that of course I appreciated Daniel, that we had a wonderful partnership, and I changed the subject. But driving home that night, with Daniel telling me about something Roger had said in the living room, I kept hearing that word, appreciated, the way it had landed, soft and precise, like a key sliding into a lock. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a pattern, I knew, of waiting for things to go wrong. It was a survival mechanism from childhood that had never fully gone offline. Not everything is a threat, I reminded myself. Not everyone is Melissa Vance. But here is the thing about survival mechanisms. Sometimes they are correct. The second strange thing happened 6 weeks later, in November, when I was working late in my home office, a room I was immensely proud of, with built-in shelves and a window that looked onto the back garden, going through the quarterly reconciliation reports for Harlow and Crane. I was the director of operations, which meant I had oversight of the company's internal accounts as well as my own department budget. It was detailed, meticulous work, and I was good at it. Numbers, for me, had always been a kind of language, reliable, honest. Numbers did not imply things, they simply were. I had been working for about 2 hours when I found a small irregularity in the vendor payment ledger. It was not large, a $1,500 discrepancy in a subcontractor invoice from a firm I didn't immediately recognize, listed under a vendor code I didn't recall approving. I flagged it in my spreadsheet and made a note to look into it in the morning. These things happened: data entry errors, duplicate invoices, miscategorized expenses. I was not alarmed. I was merely thorough. I should have been alarmed. I closed my laptop at 10:30, went downstairs to find Daniel watching television, and sat beside him on the couch with my feet tucked under me. He put his arm around me without looking away from the screen, and I rested my head on his shoulder, and I thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. Whatever strange undercurrent I had been feeling since that Sunday dinner was just noise. Patricia was difficult, but not dangerous, and Daniel was good, and I had built something real. I fell asleep on the couch, and he carried me to bed, and in the morning I forgot entirely about the vendor irregularity for 3 more weeks. It was a phone call that brought it back to me. I was in a cab on my way to a client meeting when my phone rang, not my personal cell, but my work phone, which had a distinctive double ring. The caller ID showed an external number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, the voice on the other end was brisk and professional. A woman named Carla Simmons from the legal department of a financial services company called Meridian Group. She was calling to confirm receipt of a signed consultation agreement and to schedule the initial onboarding session. I told her she had the wrong number. She read back my name, my title, my work email. She told me the agreement had been signed digitally through DocuSign 4 days prior. She gave me the IP address on the signature. I wrote it down on the back of my client folder with my heart beating slightly faster than normal and told her I would need to call her back. The cab pulled up to the office building and I paid and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the November cold, the folder in my hand, looking at the IP address I'd written down. It wasn't my work computer's address. I knew my work computer's address because I'd had IT trouble the previous spring and had needed to provide it to our systems team. This address was different. Slightly, but unmistakably different. Someone had signed a consulting agreement in my name with a company I had never heard of, and they had done it from a device that was not mine. I stood there on that sidewalk for a long moment, the cold air sharp in my throat, cars moving past me in streams of sound and exhaust, and I thought, no, this is a mistake. There's an explanation. I had been telling myself that for weeks now, but standing there with the folder in my hand and that number staring up at me, I felt the first real crack appear in the comfortable story I had been telling myself. Thin as a hairline fracture in good porcelain, but there. I went into the meeting. I sat at the conference table, and I presented the quarterly projections and answered questions and smiled and nodded and did everything I was supposed to do. And underneath all of it, running parallel and constant, like a frequency you can feel in your back teeth, was the question I could not stop asking. Who signed my name? That evening, I called IT from my office after everyone else had gone home and asked them to run a check on recent DocuSign activity attached to my credentials. The technician, a young man named Brendan, whom I had always found reliable, came back to me within 40 minutes with a result that made the room feel very briefly tilted. There had been 3 separate DocuSign completions linked to my work profile over the past 2 months. One was the Meridian Group agreement. The other 2 were documents he couldn't immediately identify from his end. They appeared to be routed through a third-party portal, and the metadata was obscured. 3 documents, signed in my name, without my knowledge. I thanked him, told him not to file a report yet, that I would come back to him in the morning. Then I sat in my office with the door closed and the lights of the city coming through the window, and I put my head in my hands and I breathed. In and out, in and out. Because the thing I had been refusing to see was beginning to take shape in the dark, the way shapes take form in a room when your eyes finally adjust. And it was not small. It was not a data entry error or a miscategorized invoice. It was something deliberate, something careful, something that had been happening for weeks, right under my nose, while I slept on the couch and let Daniel carry me to bed and told myself everything was fine. The question was not just who. The question was why. And the answer, the one I was not yet ready to face, had the shape of a woman with a carefully folded table napkin and a glass of red wine asking me about my raise. I spent that night at my desk, not sleeping. I made a list, the way I always do when something feels like it is sliding out of control. A long, careful, column-by-column list of everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything I needed to verify. The 3 DocuSign documents, the vendor irregularity from the quarterly ledger, which I now pulled back up and stared at with different eyes. The Meridian Group, which I looked up in the state business registry and found registered 8 months ago, recent, deliberately recent, to a managing member whose name I did not recognize, a woman named Deborah Crane. No relation, as far as I knew, to the Harlow and Crane where I worked. Or so I thought at first. I searched Deborah Crane for 40 minutes. Nothing came up that seemed connected. A LinkedIn profile with no photo, minimal information, a single listed connection. I clicked on the connection and my breath stopped in my chest. Clean and complete, the way sound stops in a room when something falls. The connection was Patricia Harmon, my mother-in-law. Listed as a former colleague from a community board position 5 years ago. The same Patricia who had sat across from me at her kitchen table asking about my raise with her hands folded around her wine glass and that precise, measured pause before the word appreciated. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. There are moments in life where the shape of a thing you have been refusing to see becomes undeniable. Not because new information has arrived. The information had been arriving, piece by piece, for weeks. But because something shifts in you, some final resistance drops, and you allow yourself to look at what has already assembled itself while you were looking away. This was one of those moments. Patricia had been planning this. She was connected to the shell company being used to reroute my income. Someone had forged my signature 3 times to move money through channels I hadn't sanctioned. And the only other person in my life with access to my work login credentials, to my email, to the DocuSign account linked to my professional profile, was Daniel. I sat with that thought for a long time. I put it down and picked it up again. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the sink drinking it in the dark, looking at the back garden where the October leaves had piled against the fence. Daniel, who carried me to bed. Daniel, who said every morning that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Daniel, whose mother asked carefully pointed questions about my salary while refilling wine glasses with the practiced ease of someone managing a performance. I did not want it to be true. But want, I had learned long ago, was not the same as true. I went back to my desk and I opened my laptop again, and I did something I had never done before in 4 years of marriage. I accessed the shared household account we used for utilities and groceries and checked not just the balance, but the full transaction history. Nothing unusual there. Then I checked the joint savings account, the one we had opened 3 years ago when we bought the house, for the eventual goal of a down payment on a property investment. $42,000, accumulated over 3 years of disciplined saving, most of it from my income. I looked at the balance. I looked at it again. Then I looked at the recent transactions. 11 days ago, $30,000 had been transferred out of the account. The authorization had come from Daniel's login credentials. The destination was an account I did not recognize. $30,000, 11 days ago. While I had been sitting on the couch with my feet tucked under me and my head on his shoulder, watching television thinking, this is enough. This is more than enough. The physical sensation was precise and strange, a rushing in my ears like water, a cold that started in my hands and moved up my arms, a sudden awareness of my own heartbeat as though it had become something external, something happening to someone else. The kitchen felt very far away. The garden, the fence, the piled leaves, very far away. I was sitting in my desk chair with my laptop open and the number on the screen, 12,000 remaining where 42,000 should have been, and I could feel the world I had built very carefully for 12 years making a sound. Not a crack, more like a held breath before a crack. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Later, people would ask, "Didn't you cry?" And the honest answer is that I didn't. Not then. What I felt was not grief. It was the cold, clarifying precision of someone who has just understood the rules of the game they have been playing without knowing they were playing it. All the patience I had practiced, all the benefit of the doubt I had extended, all the times I had told myself, "You're being paranoid, you're being difficult, not everything is Melissa Vance," all of it had cost me $30,000, 3 forged signatures, and a husband who had authorized a transfer while I slept on the couch beside him. No, not grief, something colder and quieter and far more useful. I picked up my phone and called my father. My father, Robert, was a man of few words and great precision. He had worked as a contracts auditor for 30 years, and he thought in documents, in paper trails, in the gap between what people said and what the records showed. He was also the person who had driven me to my college orientation because my mother had to work, and who had said, pulling up to the dormitory with my boxes in the trunk, "You worked for this. No one gave it to you. Don't you ever let anyone take it from you." I had not forgotten. I called him at 6:45 in the morning from my desk chair with the laptop still open, and I told him everything, in order, the way he had always taught me. Facts first, feelings later. He was silent for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "Do you have screenshots of the transaction history?" I said I was taking them as we spoke. "Good. Don't confront Daniel yet. Don't confront Patricia. You need an attorney before you say a single word to either of them. Do you understand me?" I said I understood. "I know a woman," he said, "Elaine Marsh. Family law, but she handles financial fraud too. She's sharp. I'll call her when her office opens at 9. A pause. "Sarah, you're going to be all right." I didn't tell him that I knew that already. I just said thank you, and we stayed on the phone together, quietly, while the October dawn came gray through my office window. Elaine Marsh was, as my father had promised, sharp. I met with her that afternoon while Daniel was at work. I had said nothing to him that morning, had kissed him goodbye in the kitchen with a steadiness that surprised even me, had handed him his coffee and told him I had a late meeting. All of it perfectly normal, perfectly warm, while behind my eyes the number 12,000 sat like a stone. In Elaine's office, with the documents I had printed and the screenshots I had taken, and the Meridian Group registration I had pulled from the state database, she went quiet in the focused way of someone building a structure in their mind. She asked precise questions. She made notes. "The DocuSign signatures," she said. "If they were executed from a device in your home or on your home network, we can establish that definitively with a subpoena to the platform. Combined with the financial transfer, this is a meaningful case." She looked at me steadily over her reading glasses. "What I need you to understand is that the next 2 to 3 weeks are critical. You do not tip your hand. You gather everything. You come back to me with the full picture, and then we move." I nodded. I could do that. Patience had always been my skill, even when it had been used against me. What I had not anticipated, what broke through the careful, strategic calm I had constructed, was the reunion invitation. It arrived in my email 4 days later, the 20-year reunion for Jefferson High School, class of 2006, a hotel ballroom, cocktail hour, formal dinner. And in the RSVP confirmation list, publicly visible to all attendees, one name that made my throat tighten involuntarily: Melissa Vance. Melissa, who had called me the scholarship girl in the cafeteria loud enough for 2 tables to hear. Melissa, whose mother had been friends with Patricia Harmon since before I ever came into the picture, a detail that had seemed irrelevant when Daniel first told me, years ago, and now felt like a piece of a puzzle I had been assembling with my eyes closed. I sat with the invitation for a long time. Then I called Elaine. "Go," she said immediately when I explained. "Wear something expensive. Keep your phone charged and your mouth closed. But Sarah, go." My father, when I told him, said simply, "Document everything." And my friend Cassandra, who had known me since before Daniel, before the brownstone, before the 6-figure salary, back when I was still the girl from the other side of the city, said, "Oh, you're going. We're both going. And you're wearing the green dress." The night of the reunion, I arrived with Cassandra, who was 7 years deep into her own impressive career as a forensic accountant, and who had agreed, at my request, to bring a very specific piece of equipment in her evening bag: a small portable document scanner, no larger than a thick pen. 3 days before the reunion, acting on information Elaine had quietly obtained through a discovery motion on the Meridian Group filing, I had located the third forged DocuSign document. It was a consulting authorization giving Deborah Crane, Patricia's shell company alias, writes to bill under my professional credentials for services rendered to 3 separate corporate clients of Harlow & Crane. $40,000 over 6 months, authorized on paper by me. My name, my signature, not my hand. The night before the reunion, going through the financial documents Elaine had subpoenaed, I found the thing that made my hands go still on my keyboard for a full 30 seconds. A payment record from the Meridian Group account, Deborah Crane's account, to a personal account. Not Patricia's personal account, not Deborah Crane's. A direct transfer 2 months ago of $8,000 to an account registered to a Melissa R. Vance. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I printed it and added it to the folder. Melissa Vance, who had worked in financial consulting for 15 years. Melissa Vance, who was a member of 3 of the same professional associations as Patricia Harmon. Melissa Vance, who had called me a poor little nobody in 1998 and who had apparently agreed, for $8,000, to use her industry contacts to introduce Patricia's shell company to the corporate clients that had subsequently hired me, or rather the forged version of my name, for services they believed I was personally rendering. It was not accidental that I was going to this reunion. None of it, I now understood, had been accidental on their end either. Melissa had known exactly what she was involved in. She had known exactly whose credentials were being used, and she had taken the money. The ballroom was warm and bright and loud with the particular sound of people performing their best versions of themselves. Cassandra and I moved through it with drinks in our hands, and I felt very calm, the cold, clear calm I had first found at my desk at 3 a.m, which had not left me in the weeks since. I was looking for 2 people. I found Melissa first. She was near the bar, in a red dress, her hair expensively highlighted, laughing at something with a group of women I half recognized from our shared past. She looked, superficially, exactly as she had at 17. The same confidence, the same slight tilt of the chin when she noticed you approaching, the same assessment moving behind her eyes. She saw me, and the laugh didn't stop, but it changed, sharpened. She waited until she was close enough that her voice was only for me, and then she said it, still the same poor little nobody, with a smile. With the absolute certainty of someone who has never once been wrong about anything that mattered. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about 12 years of working, about a brownstone, a salary, $40,000 rerouted through a shell company, a husband who had transferred $30,000 while I slept on the couch, about a folder on the passenger seat of my car, about Elaine Marsh, who was, at that very moment, in coordination with a financial crimes investigator whose paperwork had been filed the previous morning. I said quietly, "I know about the $8,000, Melissa. I know about Deborah Crane. And by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the investigator assigned to the Meridian Group case will know your name." The color moved out of her face in a way that was, despite everything, deeply instructive. She did not look like a predator anymore. She looked like someone who had made a calculation and gotten the math catastrophically wrong. I held her gaze for one long, unhurried moment, and then I turned and walked away. Cassandra was waiting near the exit with the envelope from the car already in her hands. What followed was not quick, and I want to be honest about that. Justice, real justice, is slow and procedural and unglamorous. There are depositions and subpoenas and discovery motions, and weeks where you wait and nothing visible happens. Patricia's shell company was formally dissolved in January with a concurrent civil suit for $40,000 in misappropriated consulting revenue. The forgery case moved through a separate channel. Elaine had been right that the DocuSign subpoena was decisive, and by February, Deborah Crane, née a ghost, was traceable to Patricia Harmon through 3 different financial records that left no room for plausible deniability. Melissa Vance settled quietly, quickly, and privately. She repaid the $8,000 and cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. I do not know what her life looks like now. I have not looked. Daniel. I need to tell you about Daniel because he is the part people always ask about. When I confronted him, not at the reunion, not in public, but in our kitchen on a Sunday morning with the documents on the table between us, he did not deny it. He sat very still with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the table, and he said, "I thought," and then stopped. And then, she told me it was a loan structure, that it was legal, that you would eventually, and then stopped again. And then he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something genuinely stripped, and said, "I knew it was wrong. I knew. I just couldn't say no to her. I never learned how to say no to her." I think he believed that explanation was sufficient. I think part of him believed that loving me and being incapable of protecting me could coexist without consequence. He was wrong about that. It is possible to love someone and still fail them so completely that love is no longer enough. I knew that in my body before I could articulate it in words. We separated in March. The divorce was finalized in the autumn. He moved back into his mother's house, which struck me, the day I heard it, as deeply fitting. The two of them in that house that he had never really left, not in any way that counted. 8 months after the reunion, I sat on the back steps of the brownstone with a cup of Colombian coffee that was very good and a morning that was very quiet. The garden looked different than it had in October. The leaves that had piled against the fence were long gone, and something had begun to come through the soil near the back wall, small and green and improbable in the late winter cold. Cassandra had helped me plant bulbs in November, on a Sunday afternoon that involved rain gear and laughter and a bottle of wine we didn't open until after dark. I remembered saying to her, "I feel like myself again." And she had looked at me with mud on her jacket and said, "No, you feel like yourself for the first time." I sat on the back steps and held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at the small green things pressing up through the soil. And I thought about 12 years of work. About the brownstone that was mine, entirely and legally and irrevocably mine. About the salary that went into an account with my name only. About Elaine Marsh, who had become something close to a friend. About my father, who had said, "You worked for this. Don't let anyone take it from you." No one had taken it. They had tried, carefully and over a long period of time, with documents and shell companies and 1,000 small maneuvers I had almost missed. But they had not gotten it. And I had not let the experience make me small or bitter or afraid of the world in the way I had been afraid at 17, when my smallness was the thing people used to feel large. I was not small. I had never been small. I drank my coffee and watched the green things grow. And I was, for the first time in a long time, simply and completely fine.